Morning all. Thank you so very, very much for all the lovely responses I got to Elsa chapter 1. It's lovely to see that how many people from all over the world have read Elsa. Okay, it's really brilliant. Thank you so very much. Anyway, here's chapter 2. Elsa meets other wild animals. While I was absent in Nairobi, George told me that Elsa was very much upset and never left him for a moment. She followed him around, sat under his office desk where he was working, and at night slept on his bed. Each evening he took her for a walk, but on the day of my return, she refused to accompany him and sat herself down expectantly in the middle of the drive. Nothing would move her. Could it have been that she knew I was coming back? If so, to what animal instinct can one attribute such foreknowledge? Behavior of this kind is difficult, if not impossible, to explain. When I arrived alone, she gave me a great welcome, but it was heartbreaking to see her searching everywhere for her sisters. For many days to come, she gazed into the bush and called for them. She followed us everywhere, evidently fearing that we too might desert her. To reassure her, we kept her in the house. She slept on our bed, and we were often woken by her rough tongue licking our faces. As soon as we could make the necessary arrangements, we took her on safari in order to break this atmosphere of waiting and distress, and luckily she took to all that safari means and loved it as much as we did. My truck, packed with soft luggage and bedding rolls, was ideal for her to travel in, since from a comfortable couch she could watch all that was going on. We camped by the Niro River, whose banks are lined with palms and acacia bush. In the dry season, the shallow waters flow slowly down to the Lorraine swamp, passing some rapids and forming many deep pools, which are full of fish. Near our camp there was a rock. Let me start again. Near our camp there were rocky ridges. Elsa explored their clefts, sniffed among the rocks, and usually ended up settling herself on the top of some rock from which she could survey the surrounding bush. In the late afternoon, the sun turned the country into a blaze of warm colours. Then she blended into the reddish stone as though she were part of it. This was the most enjoyable part of the day. Everything and everyone relaxed after the great heat. The shadows lengthened and became a deep purple until, by the rapid sinking of the sun, all details were extinguished. A faint bird call died gradually away. The world grew silent. All was in suspense, awaiting the darkness and, with it, the awakening of the bush. Then the long-drawn call of the hyenas gave the signal and the hunt began. I remember one particular evening I secured Elsa to a tree in front of the tents, and she started to chew her dinner while I sat in the darkness and listened. Patty hopped onto my lap and, nestling comfortably, ground her teeth, a habit which I knew indicated that she was happy. A cicada chirruped near the river, where rippling waters reflected the rising moon. In the soft darkness above, the stars sparkled brilliantly, and in the northern frontier they always seemed to me to be twice as big as anywhere else. Now I heard a deep, vibrating sound, like that of a distant aircraft. This meant that elephants were making their way to the river. Luckily, the wind was in our favour, and the rumbling soon ceased. Suddenly, the unmistakable grunts of lion became audible. At first they were very far away, Then gradually they grew louder and louder. What could Elsa be thinking about all this? In fact, she seemed utterly unconcerned at the approach of her own kind. She tore at her meat, gnawing slices off with her molars. Then she rolled on her back, all four paws in the air, and dozed off, while I sat listening to the chuckling of hyena, the yelping of jackal, and the magnificent chorus of the lions. It is very hot at this season, so Elsa spent part of the day in the water. Then, when the sun made this uncomfortable for her, she would rest in the reeds, at intervals rolling lazily into the river, where she landed with a great splash. As we knew that crocodiles were plentiful in the Uzo Niru, this caused us some concern, but none ever approached her. Elsa was always full of mischief, sharing her fun with us. She would splash us whenever she found us off our guard, or she would jump quickly out of the water, pounce on us, wet as she was, and we would find ourselves rolling in the sand with our cameras, field glasses, in other words binoculars, and rifles pressed down by her heavy dripping body. She used her paws in a variety of ways. She would use them in gentle caresses, but she could also deliver a playful, well-aimed smack at full speed, and she knew a little jiu-jitsu trick, which unfailingly laid us flat on our backs. No matter how prepared we were for the act, she would give just a small twist to our ankles with her paw, and down we went. Elsa was very particular about her claws. Certain trees with a rough bark provided her with the means of sharpening them, and she scratched away, leaving deep lines until she was satisfied with the result of the operation. Elsa was not afraid of the sound of a shot, and she grew to know that bang meant a dead bird. She loved retrieving, especially guinea fowl, whose quills she crunched, though she very rarely ate the flesh and never the feathers. The first bird was always hers. She would carry it proudly in her mouth till she found this uncomfortable. Then she placed it at my feet and looked at me, as though to say, "Please carry it for me." Then, so long as I dangled it in front of her nose, she trotted good-naturedly after it. Whenever she discovered some elephant droppings, she at once rolled in them. Indeed, it seemed that she regarded them as an ideal bath powder. She hugged the big balls and rubbed the perfume well into her skin. Rhino droppings she also found attractive. In fact, she liked the droppings of most herbivorous animals, but preferred those of pachyderms. We often wondered about this behavior. Could it come from an instinct to disguise her own scent from the animals that, in a natural state, she would kill and eat? The habit, common to the domestic cat and dog, of rolling in excrement is no doubt a degenerate form of the same instinct. We never saw her roll in the droppings of carnivores. One afternoon, Elsa rushed off into the bush, attracted by the noise of elephant. Soon we heard loud trumpetings and screams and the cackling of guinea fowl as well. In great excitement, we awaited the outcome of this meeting. After a while, the elephant noises ceased, but to make up for it, the guinea fowl raised a most alarming clatter. Then, to our amazement, Elsa emerged from a thicket, closely followed by a flock of Voltarian guinea fowl, who seemed determined to chase her away. For, whenever she made an attempt to sit down, they chuckled and cackled, so that she just had to keep going. Only after these bold birds became aware of our presence was she allowed some peace. During one of our walks, Elsa suddenly froze in front of a cluster of Sansevieria bush, then leapt in the air and retreated hastily, giving us a look which seemed to say, "Why don't you do like me?" At this moment, we saw a large snake between the pointed sword-shaped Sansevieria leaves. It was well protected in the impenetrable thicket of blades, and we thanked Elsa for her warning. When we returned to Izolo, the rains had started. The country was covered with little rivulets and pools. This provided fine fun for Elsa. She splashed in every one of them, and greatly invigorated, proceeded with pouncing leaps to cover us with what she eventually considered to be heavenly mud. This was beyond a joke. We had to make her realize that she had grown too heavy for such light-hearted, flying jumps. We explained the situation to her by the judicious use of a small stick. She understood at once, and thereafter we very seldom had to make use of it, though we always carried it as a reminder. By now Elsa also understood the meaning of no, and she would obey even when tempted by an antelope. Often it was touching to see her torn between her hunting instinct and her wish to please us. Anything moving seemed to her as it would to most dogs, just asking to be chased. But, as yet, her instinct to kill had not fully developed. Of course, we had been careful never to show her goat meat alive. She had plenty of opportunity of seeing wild animals, but as we were usually with her when this happened, she gave chase merely in play, and always came back to us after a short time, rubbed her head against our knees, and told us with a low meow about the game. We had animals of all kinds around our house, a herd of waterbuck and impala, and about 60 reticulated giraffes had been our neighbours for many years. Elsa met them on every walk, and they got to know her very well, and even allowed her to stalk them to within a few yards before they quietly turned away. And a family of bat-eared foxes got so used to her that we were able to approach to within a few paces of the burrows of these timid animals, while their cubs rolled in the sand in front of the entrance holes, guarded by the parent foxes. Mongooses also provided Elsa with a lot of fun. These little creatures, no bigger than a weasel, live in abandoned termite hills, which, made as they are of cement-hard soil, constitute ideal fortresses. Standing as high as 8 feet and built with many air funnels, they also provide cool shelters during the heat of the day. About tea time, the mongoose comedians leave their stronghold and feed on grubs and insects until it becomes dark, when they return home. That was the hour at which our walks often made us pass them. Elsa would sit absolutely still in front of the anthill, besieging them, apparently deriving great satisfaction from seeing the little clowns popping their heads out of the air funnels, only to give a sharp whistle of alarm and disappear like shadows. But if the mongooses were fun to tease, the baboons were irritating. They lived in a leopard-safe dormitory on a sheer cliff near our house. There they would spend the night in safety, clinging to the slightest depression in the rock. Before sunset they always retired to this refuge, and the cliff appeared to be covered with black spots. From their safe position they barked and shrieked at Elsa, who could do nothing in retaliation. It was an exciting moment when the cub met her first elephant, an anxious one too, for poor Elsa had no mother to warn her against these animals who regard lion as the only enemies of their young, and therefore sometimes kill them. One day Nuru, who had taken her out for her morning walk, came back panting to say that Elsa was playing with an elephant. We took our rifles and he guided us to the scene. There we saw a great old elephant, his head buried in a bush, enjoying his breakfast. Suddenly Elsa, who had crept up from behind, took a playful swipe at one of his hind legs. A scream of shocked surprise and injured dignity followed this piece of impertinence. Then the elephant backed from the bush and charged. Elsa hopped nimbly out of his way and, quite unimpressed, began to stalk him. It was very funny, though an alarming sight, and we could only hope that we should not need to use our guns. Luckily, after a time, both became bored with the game. The old elephant went back to his meal, and Elsa lay down close by and went to sleep. During the next few months, the cub took every opportunity that came her way to harry elephant, and there were many such occasions, for the elephant season was beginning. This meant an annual invasion by herds numbering several hundred animals. The great beasts seemed to be very familiar with the geography of Izolo, and always went to the places where the best maize and Brussels sprouts grew. Apart from this, and in spite of a dense African population and motor traffic, they behaved very well and gave little trouble. As our home, which is 3 miles distant from Izolo, is surrounded by the best browsing, a large number of the invaders come to visit us, and an old rifle range in front of the house has become their favorite playground. At this season, we have therefore to be very careful on our walks, for small groups of elephant are always about. Now, having to protect Elsa as well as ourselves made us all the more alert. One day at noon, Nuru and Elsa returned home, followed by a large number of elephant. From our dining room window, we could see them in the bush. We tried to divert her attention, but she had turned and was determined to meet the advancing herd. Then, suddenly, she sat down and watched them as they turned away and walked in single file across the rifle range. It was a grand parade as one after another emerged from the bush, in which Elsa crouched, giving them her scent. She waited until the last of about 20 elephant had crossed. Then she followed them slowly, her head held in a straight line with her shoulders, her tail outstretched. Suddenly, the big bull in the rear turned, and joking his massive head at Elsa, screamed with a high-pitched trumpeting sound. This war cry did not intimidate her, and she walked determinedly on. So did the big elephant. We went out, and following cautiously, saw a glimpse of Elsa and the elephants mingling together in the undergrowth. There was no screams, nor any sound of breaking branches, which would have indicated trouble. All the same, we waited anxiously till eventually the cub reappeared, looking rather bored with the whole business. But not all elephants which Elsa met were amiable as these. On another occasion, she succeeded in starting a colossal stampede. The first thing we heard was tremendous thundering on the rifle range, and when we reached the scene, we saw a herd of elephant racing downhill, with Elsa close behind them. Finally, she was charged by a single bull, but she was much too quick for him, and in time he gave up the attack and followed his companions. Giraffe provided her with great fun too. One afternoon, when we were out with her, she took on 50, wriggling her body close to the ground and shivering with excitement. She stalked them, advancing step by step. The giraffes took no notice of her. They just stood and watched her nonchalantly. She looked at them and then back at us, as though she wanted to say, "Why do you stand there like candlesticks and spoil my stalking?" Finally, she got really cross, and rushing full speed at me, knocked me flat. Towards sunset, we ran into a herd of elephant. The light was failing rapidly, but we could just see the shapes of elephant in all directions. It has always seemed miraculous to me that these colossal animals can move noiselessly through the bush, and thus able to surround one without warning. This time there was no doubt that we were cut off. Wherever we looked for an opening to run through, an elephant blocked the way. We tried to hold Elsa's attention, for it was not a moment for her to start one of her games with the giants. But all too soon she spotted them and dashed into their midst. Then she was beyond our control. We heard screams and shrill, piercing cries. My nerves were on edge, for, however carefully we maneuvered through the dark bush, there stood an elephant confronting us. At last we managed to make our way out and reached home, but, of course, without Elsa. She only returned much later, Apparently she had had great fun and certainly did not understand why I was a nervous wreck. A hedge borders our drive. No ordinary animal will break through it because it contains a caustic lactic. If the smallest drop of this substance touches the eye, it burns the membrane most painfully and will inflame it for many days. It is therefore given a wide berth by all animals except elephant, who love eating its juicy twigs, and after a night's meal leave big open gaps. Once when I was feeding Elsa in her enclosure, I heard the unmistakable rumbling of elephant behind this hedge, which borders her wooden house. And there, sure enough, were 5 of the giants, crunching loudly and making a meal of the only barrier which stood between us. Indeed, at the time I am writing about, the hedge was already a poor sight owing to their attentions. To add to the excitement of Elsa's life, there was now a rhino living close to our house. One evening at dark, when we were returning from a walk, the cub suddenly darted between the servants' quarters. A tremendous commotion ensued. We went to find out what it was about and saw Elsa and the rhino facing each other. After a few moments of indecision, the rhino, snorting angrily, retreated with the cub in hot pursuit. The following evening I was walking with Elsa and Nuru. We were late, and it was getting dark, when suddenly the Somali grabbed my shoulder, thus preventing me from walking straight into the rhino, who stood just behind a bush, facing us. I leapt back and ran. Luckily Elsa, who had not seen the rhino, thought I was playing a game and followed me. This was fortunate, for rhinos are unpredictable creatures who are apt to charge anything, including lorries and trains. The next day, however, Elsa had her fun. She chased the animal for 2 miles across the valley, Nuru loyally panting behind her. After this experience, the rhino took itself off to quieter quarters. By now we had established a routine for Elsa. The mornings were cool. It was then that we often watched the impala leaping gracefully on the rifle range and listened to the chorus of the awakening birds. As soon as it got light, Nuru released Elsa, and both walked a short distance into the bush. The cub, full of unspent energy, chased everything she could find, including her own tail. Then, when the sun got warm, she and Nuru settled under a shady tree, and Elsa dozed while he read his Quran and sipped tea. Nuru always carried a rifle to protect them both against wild animals, but was very good about following our instructions to shout before shooting. He was genuinely fond of Elsa and handled her very well. About tea time, the 2 of them returned, and we took over. First, Elsa had some milk, then we wandered into the hills or walked in the plain. She climbed trees, appeared to sharpen her claws, followed exciting scents, or stalked Grant's gazelle and Ganook, which sometimes played hide-and-seek with her. Much to our surprise, she was fascinated by tortoises, which she rolled over and over. She loved playing, and never did she miss an opportunity of starting a game with us. We were her pride, and she said everything with us. As darkness fell, we returned home and took her to her enclosure, where her evening meal awaited her. It consisted of large quantities of raw meat, mostly sheep and goat. She got her roughage by breaking up the rib bones and the cartilages. As I held her bones for her, I would watch the muscles on her forehead moving powerfully. I always had to scratch the marrow out for her. She licked it greedily from my fingers, resting her heavy body upright against my arms. While this went on, Patty sat on the windowsill, watching us, content to know that soon her turn would come to spend the night cuddled round my neck, and that then she would have me to herself. Till then, I sat with Elsa playing with her, sketching her or reading her. These evenings were our most intimate time, and I believe that her love for us was mostly fostered in these hours, when, fed and happy, she would doze off with my thumb still in her mouth. It was only on moonlit nights that she became restless. Then she padded along the wire, listening intently, her nostrils quivering to catch the faintest scent which might bring a message from the mysterious night outside. When she was nervous, her paws became damp, and I could often judge her state of mind by holding them in my hands. And that brings to an end chapter 2. I hope you enjoyed it. And have a fantastic rest of your weekend. May your gods go with you, and be safe.